Listen, laugh, and learn with Sacha and Ish as they share their experiences, thoughts, and tips to build skills that are not so average and a career that's not so ordinary. This is the Not So Breakfast Show.
All right, welcome to the Not So Breakfast Show today, the podcast for leadership and career development. And today we're talking about reinventing yourself. And we've got a special guest on the show, and she is a special guest to us. She's a friend. She's been a work colleague over the years. And I think someone that has reinvented themselves, well, amazingly, because when I was looking at her resume, it looks like there's about 9 people that have invested everything that they've done in their time and their lives to put forward a resume like that and have changed careers a number of times. But we're going to unpack that story and get to know her a little bit better. But joining me as always, and I feel like I should give you a special introduction this week because you're in Fiji and it feels like you're on a break. So I want to make it a little bit more special. I'm going to introduce you like Brett Goldstein would introduce one of his guests on his podcast. So we have with us today a speaker, a presenter, a coffee shop owner, a podcaster, an amateur actor, a Harvard Business School graduate, a lover, a fighter, a survivor, a runner, and a role model to humanity. And she's joining us all the way from Fiji. I can't believe she's here, but she is. It's Sacha Coburn.
Hola. Ishmael, you have nailed that Brett Goldstein intro. That's phenomenal. Well done, man.
Thank you.
That is top notch. And on the subject of reinvention, I'm not a person who traditionally drinks alcohol. I might drink a little bit from time to time, a glass of wine or a beer, but I've been drinking much less. But I thought today of all days might be a chance to just reinvent myself and see how I go having a few gins. So it's it was gin o'clock quite early this morning. It's quite late as we're recording this. So let that be like a tribute to the topic of reinvention. I'm really, really super stoked to be with our dear friend today. I first met our interviewee. I don't even remember when. We'd obviously been in each other's spaces, but we actually met, and I'm not sure if you remember this, we met in the queue at the airport. We were both boarding a plane, having been at an event together. And since we had that first conversation, I've been nothing but impressed at a couple of things. First of all, the way this person goes about their lives, just such integrity, such dignity, such respect both for herself and for other people in the way that she graciously exits and enters new fields, new professions, new studies. She is super smart, incredibly disciplined, and is so much fun. And it's been just a joy over the last, I don't know how many years, 15, however many years, to intersect whenever there's been a possibility. And wherever I'm in Melbourne, which is where this person lives, I'm always like, please, please, please. I'm like a sort of a begging puppy. Please, could you give me just a moment of your time? Because I'm always so invigorated. And so our guest today, without further ado, is Inge Gnatt. And I know that sounds like Baba Ganoush, but it's not. It's Inge Gnatt, and it's a beautiful name because it has a story behind it in terms of the heritage that Inge brings. So that might be a good place to start. Welcome, Queen of Everything. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what you're doing now, but then shadow back to like where you came from.
Thank you. And I'm blushing at your introduction. So I am a sort of Danish-Swedish Kiwi, but unfortunately I don't speak Danish or Swedish. I only speak New Zealand.
Yeah, well done.
I'm led to believe with a slight Australian twang these days. But I think given the fact that I've lived in Australia for 23 years, I could definitely be forgiven for that. So where am I now? Well, you've caught me at the tail end of a clinical PhD in psychology, which I'm also working as a lecturer in psychology and counselling. And then I also work for a large public hospital on a project that was instigated by the Department of Health. And what that one is about is understanding the reasons why people may enter, stay in, or leave the public mental health workforce. And then obviously I know both of you through Les Mills and Group Fitness. So I am a group fitness instructor as well and a trainer for Les Mills. And I also lead one of the teams here in Australia. No wonder I'm so tired.
Wow. I'm often the one who is probably not the smartest in the room when it comes to being next to Sacha. And now I feel like the kid that's been invited in for work experience day as I sit here with the two of you. But that's okay. I can be the glue that holds it all together. But I remember meeting you at Les Mills back in the day when you were selling memberships, and you said it was something like 2005, I think was when we kind of first connected. And you were, I'm just going to say, you were one of the best salespeople that Les Mills had, and the one that everyone was trying to beat, and everyone was like, how is Inge getting her sales targets every single month, like all the time? Didn't matter what the promotion was, you just got it all the time. And I think that's probably because you are really good at understanding people and connecting with people, and it's probably led you down into the directions that you've kind of moved on to. But you also had a career as a dancer as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I won't sort of labour it because, as you pointed out, I have had quite a varied journey through life, and there's a few lessons that I've learned from that. Maybe the first one is that you may not have the most pieces of paper in the room, Ish, but I think that our life experiences are actually what really matters. And that's something that I've always really respected in you, and probably something that I would also connect with myself, because I also left school quite young. For a different reason. I left school because I wanted to pursue a career in ballet, and anyone that sort of knows ballet and dance would understand that you peak quite young. So I, at 15 years of age, decided that I would audition for the New Zealand School of Dance because that's what I wanted to do, and didn't even think anything of it. And I did get in, and so just after I turned 16, started my full-time training at the New Zealand School of Dance and Classical in Wellington, which is actually where I'm from. Fast forward to a year and a half in, and I was just in class one morning and jumped and landed and actually broke my ankle, broke my leg. So that was sort of a really big turning point.
Why did you do that?
Oh, well, I don't know. It's silly, really. But yeah, I suppose I look back on that, and at the time it was quite devastating, of course, because I was dancing well and I was hoping to kind of head towards entering a ballet company, and that stopped me in my tracks. But what it also did was it gave me a lot of time to think about my experiences in ballet and in that school. And I came back and I did the end of year performance and all of that, but something just didn't kind of sit right for me. And so the night before I was entering my third year, which is the final year of training, I said to my mum, I'm not going back. So I'm sure that was probably a bit of a shock, because I'm probably think about it and probably agonize over it a bit much, a lot myself. I really think decisions through. I don't make any decisions lightly, which we get better at when we're older, of course.
What were some of the signs that you had that was kind of giving you that feeling?
I didn't feel that happy. Not to say that we don't have ups and downs, but I didn't feel very happy and I didn't feel very valued, actually. And that's not a supportive environment that a 17-year-old can thrive in. Yep. So that was really it. And I had to be honest with myself and know that it just wasn't the right place. So I came over to the Victorian College of the Arts, which my experience there was quite different. I happened to land in a year full of wonderful people who were actually my own age, whereas in New Zealand I was quite a lot younger and more immature than probably my classmates. Whereas people that I was with here were actually my own age, and I found that I really gelled with the staff and the faculty that were teaching there, and it was a wonderful experience. So I was fortunate enough to gain a degree through that, which was a Bachelor of Dance. And when I finished that, I still really struggled with very crippling self-doubt that I think had emerged back in New Zealand. I wasn't born like that. I grew up being a very confident person, but my experiences in some training had meant that I didn't feel like that anymore. And unfortunately, this was sort of before the internet was great and social media wasn't it wasn't a thing, I don't think. Maybe MSN Messenger. And so the world wasn't quite as at your fingertips as it is now. Maybe if I was 17, 18, 19 now and in that same position, I packed my bags and go and navigated in that way. But you didn't have that certainty or sort of that way of understanding, well, what's actually out there. So I stayed in Melbourne and I did a few projects and that went well, but because I didn't have the confidence, I wasn't great at actually taking opportunities that I probably should have. So there were a couple of instances where I was approached by some wonderful choreographers who said, come work with us, come and do some classes. And I have no doubt that would have led to really great work, but I just couldn't do it. And so I ended up deciding one day, I'm going to go back to New Zealand and kind of regroup and spend some time with my family. And that's when I ended up at the gym because I wasn't quite sure what to do. And I didn't really want to teach ballet. I didn't want to teach dance. So then I thought, well, I quite like the gym. Maybe I'll get a job there. And that's the only job they had. So that's the one I went for.
Nice.
Listening to you describe that now, fast forward to where you are now and you're just about to finish your PhD. You have this vastly expanded understanding of the human psyche. And what do you think we as a society, or even more simply than that, the people who are closest to you, not necessarily your family, but what could anybody have done to have helped restore you to yourself at that time, in a sense that you'd lost that confidence or that say yesness? You know, what can we learn from that to say, how do we help our young people that are in those positions now? Do you have any insight or thoughts on that?
Don't put them into ballet.
Yeah, okay.
Although, look, I'll be honest, I have actually worked with the Australian Ballet School over here, and I found that certainly the director and the school counsellor at the time were just so forward-thinking and really thought about the well-being of their students in a very holistic way. So I think that I have hope that things are moving forward, but then I also hear there's been a few things that have happened overseas where actually it sort of comes out that perhaps we're not as progressed as we would like to be. But maybe this will probably come out a little bit when I talk about what I've done in my PhD research, because I've found that I've had these moments where I've kind of looked up at the sky to the universe and said, thank you. I never really meant for any of this to happen, but the therapeutic approach and intervention that I've been using in my PhD, I've done it too, because you should. You've got to look inside yourself and understand, even though, of course, my experience is not the same as the people that have been doing the groups that I've run, but also a lot of it's around our emotional experience and understanding emotions. And so I think maybe better recognizing emotions and being able to recognize them, understand them, express them so that you're able to move through the inevitable suffering that we endure in life. Things are hard in life, and we must accept that. Pain is inevitable, suffering is inevitable. And how do we get through that? We get through that by understanding it, integrating those experiences in the way that we see ourselves in the world and the way that we see the world around us and the boundaries that we have and what we will and won't accept. So I don't know if that really answers the question. I'm not sure if I know.
Well, let me make this observation, I suppose, and then I do want you to just go straight through what have you learned, tell us that stuff, because there's so many things that roll so easily off your tongue in terms of setting boundaries and recognising pain and accepting it, and I'd love you to say more about that. But before you leap into that, I'm really struck by this, not the contradiction is the wrong word, but what you've experienced through ballet. I think we see it in a lot of sport. I see it we see it in lots of high performance environments. That is young people transition from being 13, 14, precocious 15-year-olds to now being kind of 17, 18. And this high performance world, we don't appear to have yet come up with the answer that goes, how do we have high performance where we are encouraging and motivating and putting the right amount of pressure, whether it's at school or wherever, on our young people to succeed. It seems that almost every high performance environment is also spitting people out, and so I don't think it's unique to dance. But I do think we got a lot more work in that high performance space
for sure, and maybe some of the experience that I had are now outdated, but I do remember. I must have been 13 or 14, and I can't remember what it was that I was struggling with. I think probably competitiveness and working out how to lose and navigate those sort of difficult experiences that everybody should know how to navigate. But I remember my mum reaching out to my ballet teacher at the time and saying, she's actually really struggling with this. And the ballet teacher's response was, and I will never forget it, well, if you can't handle the heat, get out of the fire. And I think that to say that to a 14-year-old is so unacceptable.
Totally.
Yeah. And the other notion is, I remember being explicitly told, leave it at the door. We don't care what you think. Leave it at the door. And that was in full-time training. Again, I probably don't think that that's actually what's going on now. But I absolutely remember that, and I think that that's really damaging and not okay, because at the end of the day, not everyone's going to get a job at the end of it, but they can take those experiences and use them as strengths in whatever it is that they go into. And probably for me, working as a psychologist with people, really bad experiences have actually been great, because not to say something that I go through is the same as someone else's, but I can be genuine that I know that you can get through. And sometimes I think that people can feel that you believe in them even when they can't quite believe in themselves yet.
Yeah, I really pick up on a few things there. I think there's a real responsibility on leaders and coaches that when you have those younger people that are in their formative years, right? So their brain's developing, they're developing physically, that we are just wrapping them around more than the performance side of things, that we are kind of embedding in the things around resilience and how to cope with loss or failure or wins or losses. And, arguably we would want people to feel that they have developed as a result of working for us in business or being coached by us in sport. But I think there's a real responsibility and understanding that we need to be viewing younger people coming in, that we are shaping them as much as giving them opportunity. And if that is a negative experience and they don't happen to find a way to change the narrative that has become a positive outcome when they look back on it, or they haven't been able to find the coach or the psychologist or the parent or the help that gets around them that helps them understand and unpack that in a different way, that we're really setting them up for a destiny of feelings and a destiny of reflecting in a really negative way. So I think the fitness industry needs to take some responsibility that really from the 80s, 90s and early 2000s, everything was shape change at the expense of health. That was what was promoted. It was how you look, and how you got to how you look was extreme. Everything was extreme, and it was just work harder and, diet harder. And I think that the fitness industry is starting to change massively, but it would be interesting in sports like high performance sports and ballet and all of those, is the style of coaching or the style of pressure supporting a generation that's coming through, and how do we develop them, to not go through what you went through.
We'll be right back.
If there was one skill that could double your income, advance your career, and increase your ability to influence, it is the skill of presenting. Whether it's on stage, in the boardroom, or at a job interview, the 30-minute presenter program will help take you to the next level. So check out our Instagram page, click the link in the bio, and get started on the 30-minute presenter program.
Exactly, yeah, because I think that what can happen is that when we're not able to have that healthy and adaptive way of understanding our own emotional experiences, we really internalize it. And eventually that's going to make its way out, whether that's in the way that you respond and react, or even it can be in illness. You can't just bottle it all up. And probably, I think we're all over 30. And back in our day, there was, I don't think so much now, but there was sort of rules around, well, stop your complaining, or it's unladylike to be angry. And one of the things that I've really learned through the research and the work that I've done in my PhD is to gratefully welcome in every emotion. So because then you can understand it.
Tell us more about that. Drop those knowledge bombs on us. We're ready to hear. Now that you've done all the study, having kind of reinvented yourself from dancer to gym salesperson to instructor, and then you've gone on to do more study, I know you're not finished, but what can you share already that you know is true and helpful?
Yeah, well, I might even go back one step, because I don't know if I've reinvented myself, but I guess I've been open to things evolving. And one of the lessons that I've learned from that, which I did make a couple of mistakes around when I was in my early 20s, was just to try things, to try something and say yes. I'm sure you would have talked about this before, and I think I recall an episode where you did. Particularly as women, we have a tendency, unless we feel like we meet all of the criteria on the job or we can do exactly what they're asking, we don't say yes.
But now that you're at the stage that you are now, I know you've run some fascinating group therapy as part of your PhD studies, and you've done some interventions, and there's stuff that you know to be true now. What are the kinds of things that you wish that everybody knew, or that you think is helpful to know that perhaps not everyone realizes? Maybe just say more about some of the earlier seeds you planted around boundaries and understanding emotions and all of that kind of stuff.
When you start a PhD, there's a few ways that you can approach it. First of all, you can come onto a predefined project. So your supervisor might have like a big project that they often will have funding for, and then they'll carve out discrete pieces of work that graduate students might engage with and sort of undertake. That wasn't actually what happened with me. I was able to carve out my own project. So the annoying thing about that is it takes longer. You don't know what you're going to do. And I'm sort of interested in everything. So it took me about a year, and being clinically focused is one of the kind of criteria. So it must be sort of helping to advance clinical psychology in some way, and it needs to be a unique or a new contribution to knowledge to actually qualify for a PhD. So I came across this therapeutic intervention or therapeutic approach, which is called compassion-focused therapy. So compassion-focused therapy came about from the work of Professor Paul Gilbert, who's based in the UK. And he was working with people who had sort of really enduring mood disorders. So imagine someone who feels really, really depressed to the point where it is significantly impacting on their life. And traditional therapies that might be a little more cognitively based, their reflections were that made sense to them. Like, I can understand that my life has lots of positive things, that I'm successful, that my family loves me, but it doesn't make me actually feel any better. And so what the therapy actually does, and I sort of talk about it in a therapeutic sense, but also this is something that can be used by anyone. And when we're working in non-clinical samples or non-clinical settings, we call it compassionate mind training. And it integrates sort of course, cognitive behavioral therapy component, so the more traditional psychological therapies, but also integrates some other things like mindfulness, the understanding that we can choose where our attention goes, neuroscience, so lots of research that continues to evolve on the way that our brain works, and that makes sense when I'm talking about the fact that we have this negative bias and we're really geared towards looking for threat to keep ourselves safe. So that's really integral. And there's this huge part around understanding our emotional experiences, and so that's why I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit today, because being able to label what our emotional experiences are is, yes, it's important in those clinical settings, but it's also important for absolutely all of us, whether you're in a leadership role or you're being led, so that you're able to articulate what it is that you're feeling and understand or have perspective on what other people might be feeling, so that it's not just the sense of feeling overwhelmed or like, I can't cope, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, so that's sort of where compassion-focused therapy came from, and how I thought that it might be relevant to what we're talking about today.
Mm.
So I'll talk about what it is from my perspective and how I understand it. So compassion is defined as a sensitivity to suffering in self and others, with a commitment to alleviate and prevent it. And I think when a lot of people think of compassion, they probably think of being kind and nice and understanding. And yes, absolutely it is, but it's way more than that. This is about developing a deep sense of wisdom and understanding of yourself and others. So if I think about it from a leadership perspective, if you're a leader, you'd need to firstly apply that to yourself, but also to then be able to apply that to the people in your team that you interact with and manage. And then it's about sort of understanding yourself, your emotions, your experiences. It's like, what's the most wise part of you that really gets it? It knows what's hard for you. It knows what are your strengths? Where do you need to develop?
So it's more than just that kind of, I see that person in pain and I feel sorry for them. So I have compassionate feelings. It goes towards taking some action, right?
Yeah, using your strength. There's an example that Paul uses in the training. If you broke your arm and you went to the doctor or went to the hospital and the doctor was like, "Oh, you poor thing."
Yeah.
I suppose. I mean, I didn't say it very compassionately, but it's like, okay, now what? So then the doctor needs to use their wisdom and their training and their understanding to take an x-ray, to read the x-ray, to go, hey, it's broken. Let's pop a cast on it. And in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, we're going to take that cast off and then we're going to rehab it so that you're back to normal. That's sort of that difference. It's not just being nice. And sometimes it's dealing with difficult things. Another thing that's quite key to this sort of approach, and we call it compassionate mind training if it's in a non-clinical setting. So this is something that can be applied to absolutely anybody. And the first thing that we really talk about is what we call psychoeducation, understanding that we've got these really tricky human brains and our human bodies can be a little bit flawed at times. So there's that analogy that, say, if I see it with my dog. When she's at the dog park, she might have a little tiff over a ball with another dog and it'll be really intense. And then 2 seconds later, they're wagging their tails together like nothing even happened. And then I'm a bit of a helicopter parent, so I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so intense. Because I'm a human, right? And my arousal doesn't just go up and then come straight back down like an animal. We've got these tricky brains that then can do things like ruminate. What would have happened if the one of the dogs had chomped the other dog? That would have been terrible. Or if I was getting chased by a lion, I could get chomped. And so even just I've found in my experience, understanding that our tricky brains and the way that we're sort of wired to be geared towards looking out for threat to keep us safe, which is very adaptive, can then become a little bit of a problem if we're we're constantly firing up that sort of that amygdala and that threat system, and we're not able to then down-regulate it.
What's your, and I was about to fall into the trap of saying, what's your advice? And then I'm like, no, you're not going to give any advice. I know that about you.
Oh, gosh.
So what are some of the ways that when we're in that, because I love that idea about Ash and I always talk about self-awareness being the key to self-mastery, right? To recognize our emotional state, or even if we don't understand it, to at least be curious. To be curious and go, I wonder why when I get that email from that person, does it really start to piss me off really quickly? To just ask questions of ourselves. But I like the idea of being compassionate in that to self as well, so less judgy about ourselves. But when we do get in that heightened arousal state where the fight or flight kicks in or the amygdala is going nuts, what are some of the ways that work in terms of talking ourselves off the ledge? Or, when I wake up sometimes, it might be 4 a.m. and I go, oh no, as soon as that one thought comes in, I'm like, oh, that's it, I'm fucked. There's no getting back to sleep now. Shit balls. Any other thoughts, I'm good. But if that one particular niggly one, so...
You human.
There's stuff, you human, you. Is there stuff that you can share with us around that?
Yeah. There it is. So one of the things that I think is really important is being able to identify with specificity what your emotions actually are that you're feeling. Are you aware of the work of Dr. Susan David?
No.
So she talks a lot about emotional agility. And so it's sort of like being able to experience and express our emotions with accuracy. It's kind of a term that she uses, which is emotional granularity. Okay,
so let me check in with you on this.
Yeah.
I love this, and one of the things that I've taught before without understanding this, and Ish and I, you and I've taught this when, as a vocabulary expander, is being able to name emotions on a spectrum. So, I used to give this example of my mum, who sometimes she'd visit us and she'd say, that tap in your kitchen, it's shocking. It is shocking the way that tap leaks. And I used to say, well, it's not really shocking, Mum. Shocking just feels to me like a bit, the fact that so many people are hungry in the world and we don't appear to be doing anything about it, that feels to me to be a little bit shocking. And my leaky tap in the kitchen is a bit, I don't know, annoying, or, this idea that emotions exist on a range. And if the only language you have is, I'm really angry, versus anger exists on a scale from mildly pissed off to just, is that what she's talking about?
Yes. So if you think about, I've written some down. So the difference in how you might react if I tell you that I'm sad or depressed or hurt or guilty or vulnerable or lonely, because they're all in that same kind of domain, but they're all slightly different, aren't they? And, well, actually, fMRI studies from Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, and what they did was they got people into the scanner, and an fMRI, as opposed to an MRI, what it looks at is the way that blood flows in your brain. So what that tells us is where there's stuff going on. So where are the connections? Where's the blood flowing? And so they had people looking at different expressions on faces, and then they would select, I can't remember if they had to say it out loud, but they had to identify what the emotion was that was being presented on that person's face. And then they did a couple of other tasks, like I think they identified shapes and gender, which when I read that, I thought, oh, that's a little outdated now, isn't it? But yeah, it's a few years ago. But what they realized through that research is that when we're able to name the emotion, it brings the prefrontal cortex online. And what it does is that it allows more of the brain to be active. And they had sort of a negative bias. I think it was 80% of the emotions were negative, 20% were positive. And so there was a big skew towards the negative kind of bias. But by actually being able to say what that emotion was, it brought the prefrontal cortex online, and it mediated, or I think you could probably think it's like integrating what that is rather than it just being this automatic kind of response that then activates the threat system. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, I used to talk about, possibly analogous, but I used to talk about when I was going through my cancer journey, that just being able to talk about it and name it, and it demystified it. And I wonder if it's a similar kind of a thing, that when you name it, recognize it, it's making it more familiar and less scary. Or
definitely. And you don't have to say it out loud. It can be journaling, or it can just, there's apps and things where you can jot the stuff down and just become more aware of it. Another thing that we do in the compassion-focused therapy work is that we really want to invite all of the different emotions in. So what we do is we unpack them, and there's a few things that we look at. So the first one is we might bring to mind a difficult experience. And of course, we kind of go quite sort of basic emotions: anger, anxiety, sadness. And then we look at compassion, because by that stage we've defined compassion, and the participants would understand what it actually is. I find that I personally connect a lot more with anxiety, and then there's other people that would connect much more with anger, and that's also really normal. And what I'm constantly doing is I'm trying to invite anger into the party as well, because I'm like, oh, anger, you're so helpful. Thank you for everything you do. As scary as and as overwhelming as anger can feel, it is absolutely welcome. So we think about, well, what's the function and purpose? Like, what are the motives of that actual emotion? What's it trying to do? What would be a good outcome for it when it comes in? And then we think about, what does that part of us, or what does that angry self think? What's it actually thinking? Sometimes that can be really, really rude. And then a really important one that I've always deeply connected to is, how does your body feel? Where do you feel it?
How does this show up in your body? Yeah.
This varies so much for everybody. So where do you feel that? Where does it turn up? How do you know that it's there? And of course, like, I'm giving you the very quick version of it, and this is not therapy.
This is great. It's really good.
I feel therapized.
Oh, good. Great. Well, maybe not so great.
I feel good already. Just before you go on, Inge, I can just so clearly see the applications in the leadership context, in the work context. So many of our work tensions and conflicts, it's just people having feelings about things and not knowing what to do with them, or how to handle them, or process them. And so situations escalate because people don't have the language for how to tell a colleague that they didn't like something that happened, or, I just see enormous potential for this in the workplace.
Yeah. And the thing that's resonating for me as well is the level of life experience can be so varied that someone who's younger may be going through something at work that you're all going through, but it could be impacting them completely different. And so as an older manager, I might just go, well, it's not even a problem. It's not even a big deal. Been through stuff like this before, and forget about the fact that this could be the first time that they've ever experienced that uncertainty of, what might be happening at work. So even having the understanding and compassion to think, just because my life experience is here doesn't mean that their life experience is here, and taking the time to maybe unpack that with them and what their thoughts and feelings are around it. I think that's powerful.
Yeah, I agree. So then the next thing that we think about is the behavioural action that particular emotion would want to take. And if you think about things like anger, that's sort of that attacking kind of action, rather than something like anxiety, where you may want to fold in and hide almost. And then depending on how the group feels, we may invite them to think about, are there particular memories from the past that they attach to these emotions? And of course, that might go back to your family of origin and growing up and that kind of thing. And that can be really helpful. Of course, if there's sort of been something like trauma, then I would always say that be done with someone who has professional training and experience to be able to hold that space and help you through that, which absolutely you can, but that can be quite difficult when those memories haven't been quite so nice. And then we work out, what do we actually do to settle that emotion? And that can be so helpful, because people can think, well, when I'm angry, I'm out of control and I'm outside of my window of tolerance and there's nothing I can do about it. But then when we're, and particularly in a group dynamic, all it takes is one person to do, oh, actually, this is what I do, this helps. Oh, actually, I do that too. And then people realise that they really do know how to cope.
Yeah, that shared wisdom is so powerful as well.
And we do a really similar activity with self-criticism. And this was another one where I looked up to the sky and said thank you. Because you think of self-criticism as being this really helpful thing that helps you to get things done and stops you being lazy. But when we really dig a little deeper, it's actually not that nice. And so what we can do is that we can almost soften the edges, I suppose, bringing more balance into the way that our emotional systems might interact. So critical self would be really deeply in threat and like, don't muck it out, you better not get this wrong. Whereas compassionate self can be like, you know this, trust yourself, finding this, there's this concept of safety versus safeness. I think this is really relevant to work. I can't remember if we've talked about this, Sash, but so imagine you're going to go abseiling and you put on all the gear and you may or may not have no idea, but it doesn't matter. You've got the gear on. And if you're really in your threat system and you're looking for safety, you may not get off the ground because you're just thinking about what could go wrong. Whereas if you're in the gear, you know there's someone down on the ground who's got your back, you've done the work, you know what to do, you can at least give it a go. Yeah. And I suppose what I do every day is pretty much always hard. It's hard. There's self-doubt that can creep in, but I always just think, well, didn't used to know that either. And now I know how to do that. So I can at least give it a go. And if it's not perfect, it's actually okay.
The way we set people up, then even if we give them little opportunities, that we do set them up in their safety harness so that they know that they can go out there and give it a go and that they are safe within what we've asked them to do, rather than them thinking about all the disasters that could go wrong and not executing or holding back. So having that initial conversation that, you know, I want you to give this a go. It's okay if it doesn't work out. Just check in as you go along. I've got you. Let's see what you can do. And even those little conversations could set someone up for much more success than they could ever do if they were just going, here's what I want you to do, go do it. And then you're just worrying about the fact that you might fail all the time.
Yeah. One of the leaders that I worked for, she used to say, even if you get it wrong, at least if you've tried and you can explain your thinking around the way that you approached it, then you can learn from it. And at that stage, I probably was too fearful and quite sort of shut down from that fear. Whereas I think if I had a leader like that now, I'd be like, oh, okay, Riffa, let's do it.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's give it a go. Yeah.
Beauty. And look at you today, just full of wisdom, full of learned experiences, full of having given things a go, things that you had that safety harness, but you still had to get off the cliff and, you know, have that environment. And you're so close to completing now and being able to really, not loudly and proudly, but with some sense of, authority is not the right word either, but well-earned knowledge, be able to share that with people and really help other people live more fulfilled lives, and lives where they're not hostage to their emotion. I mean, I can just think of so many people in the personal and the work environment, and I've experienced this myself, where you go, I'm just not even going to put myself in that situation because I know I'm going to behave badly. I can predict that I will be uptight and irritable, and so therefore I won't go. And on the one hand, I can go, well, that's good self-knowledge and a boundary, but it's also really limiting to continually not actually process the thing to have a fuller life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that I would go back to what you were saying before about approaching things with curiosity and being curious with that person and then bringing wisdom. And it's really hard because as a leader, you don't know everything about that person, and nor should you, because that's not appropriate. And also you don't have time. So then with these things in mind, what wisdom can you bring about yourself and help to point them in the direction where they can feel more fulfilled? whatever that might be.
Love it. We could keep talking for another hour, but then it probably would just be the three of us left. So we draw this precious time to a close. It's been such a treat to hear from you, some of those feelings and thoughts you had as you've gone through, and what we call reinvention. You've just said, no, it's really just the evolution of who you are and what it is that you're interested in doing. And we just commend you and applaud you for the ways that you have integrated and built this life of many different facets, but largely all built also about doing things for others, about serving and about helping make a difference in another person's day. And so thank you for all that you put into the world, for the willingness that you've shared with us. And I know we'd love to have you back. And I think we should talk some more about, in that work context, how might we apply some of this, the stuff on the daily. So thank you very much, Inge Gnatt. It's been wonderful to have you on the Not So Breakfast Show. I will leave Ish to wrap us up. Please take us to the break, Ish.
Look, I just also want to give you my thanks as well. I love the knowledge that you've shared today, the insights. I've learnt some stuff that I know I can actually start to even apply in my own leadership journey, but also the vulnerability to share your story. I think, that story from young broken dancer to inspirational psychologist, and the way that you're approaching this and just coming up with new ways to help others, I think is amazing. I've loved seeing your career develop. I've loved your friendship and our coffees over the years, and look forward to many more of those as we go on. But again, thank you so much. And if you've been listening to this and enjoying it, I encourage you to listen to it again. It's conversations like this where you just bring stuff out and suddenly you get onto that topic around compassion, or you find something that can just change your perspective. It's just so helpful. So we have loved doing that session with you. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you for having me.